The quiet town of Willow Creek always felt like a sanctuary, its stillness a balm to my frayed nerves. I had moved there to escape the chaos of the city, bringing only the essentials, a few belongings, my battered truck, and Max, my spirited terrier, who had been my companion through thick and thin. Life was simple, predictable, and safe, or so I thought. It began with Max. He'd always been a bundle of energy, chasing squirrels and wagging his tail at every passerby. But lately, something was off. He would whimper in the middle of the night, his small body trembling as he stared at corners of the room where nothing seemed to be. He snarled at shadows, his teeth bared, and avoided my touch as if my hand burned him. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off as a phase. Maybe he'd eaten something that didn't agree with him or had a bad dream. The change in Max was gradual, but undeniable. He stopped eating his favorite treats and would flinch at even the faintest sound. One evening, I found him pacing back and forth by the front door, his nails clicking against the wooden floor. His eyes, usually warm and full of life, seemed darker, almost hollow. It wasn't until I noticed the way he would freeze, his ears perked, staring at nothing, that I began to feel the first prickles of unease. One night I was jolted awake by the shrill ring of my phone. The clock on my bedside table read 12 a.m. Groggy and annoyed, I answered. "Hello?" "James," a voice said, calm yet deeply unsettling. It was a man's voice, smooth and deliberate, each word carefully measured. "How are you finding the quiet life?" "Who is this?" I demanded, my heart racing. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you listen. Go stand under the full moon for an hour." I froze. My name, my solitude, details no one should know. "How do you know me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I know everything about you, James. I know you left the city because you couldn't handle the pressure anymore. Too many late nights at the firm, too many deadlines, and then that one mistake, the one that cost you your career. It wasn't your fault, was it? But they blamed you anyway." I felt a chill run down my spine. No one in Willow Creek knew about my past. I had been a project manager at a large firm, juggling high-stakes contracts and impossible expectations. When a critical project failed due to factors beyond my control, the blame had landed squarely on my shoulders. My reputation was ruined, and I fled to Willow Creek, seeking anonymity and peace. "Who are you?" I whispered, gripping the phone tightly. "That doesn't matter," the voice repeated. "What matters is that you listen. If you value your life, James, you will obey." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Max was at the window, growling at something beyond the glass. His eyes glowed faintly. A trick of the light, I told myself. But the unease gnawed at me. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside. The cold night air bit at my skin as I stood beneath the pale glow of the full moon. Max barked and growled from inside, his small body pressed against the window. I felt foolish, standing there like some lunatic. But as the minutes ticked by, a strange calm settled over me, and Max's barking ceased. When I returned inside, he greeted me with a wagging tail, his usual self again. The calls came every night after that, each one more bizarre than the last. "Leave your door unlocked tonight," the voice instructed. Another time, "Avoid mirrors for the next 24 hours. And once, walk through the woods in complete darkness." I obeyed, each task filling me with dread. Yet, each time I complied, Max's strange behavior would subside. The shadows that had begun to creep into my home seemed to retreat, leaving me with a fragile sense of normalcy. But it never lasted. When the voice instructed me to leave my door unlocked, it took every ounce of courage to comply. The thought of sleeping with my home exposed to the night felt reckless and unsafe. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself pacing back and forth in the living room, Max watching me with his unnerving gaze. My fingers hovered over the lock, hesitating. I thought about the possibility of someone breaking in, the vulnerability of lying in bed while a stranger might creep through my home. Finally, I turned the latch and stepped away, feeling as though I'd just made a foolish gamble with my safety. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside set my nerves on edge. I lay in bed, gripping the covers, my eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to dance across the walls. Max growled softly at the foot of the bed, his ears pinned back. At one point, I thought I heard faint footsteps outside, but when I summoned the courage to peek through the curtains, there was nothing there. Morning came, and to my astonishment, nothing had happened. Yet, the experience left me shaken, my trust in the safety of my home eroded. Max's actions grew more alarming. He would stare at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl, his eyes glowing faintly even in the daylight. His once joyful barks turned into guttural growls, and he began avoiding me altogether, curling up in corners and watching me warily. It felt as though he was no longer my dog, but something else entirely. I began noticing other oddities around the house. Objects weren't where I left them. Keys would vanish and reappear in impossible places, and doors I knew I had locked would creak open on their own. Once I woke to find muddy footprints leading from the back door to my bedroom. They weren't mine. One night, the voice's instructions took a darker turn. Provoke a stranger into a fight, it said. I recoiled at the idea, but the voice's calm insistence left no room for argument. Reluctantly, I complied. At the local diner, I spotted him quickly. A scruffy man nursing a cup of coffee, clearly wanting to be left alone. Perfect, the voice whispered. My heart pounded as I approached. You're sitting in my spot, I said, my voice sharp. He glanced up, irritated. Plenty of seats here, he muttered, gesturing around. But the voice demanded more. I wasn't asking, I snapped, leaning in. Heads turned as tension thickened. He stood, his frame imposing. You've got 3 seconds to back off, he growled. Make me, I said, my voice steady despite the fear churning inside. His fist connected with my jaw, pain exploding as I staggered back. A waitress intervened, ordering us out. The man stormed off, muttering curses, while I stumbled into the night, my face throbbing. That night, the shadows stayed away, and for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. But the voice's demands only escalated, each task more dangerous and morally compromising than the last. My brief relief was overshadowed by the knowledge that the worst was yet to come. One fateful night, it started giving commands I could not possibly carry out. You must leave Max tied outside overnight, it instructed one evening. He is changing. If you don't, it will come for you. No, I snapped, anger flaring. I won't abandon him. Then you've sealed your fate, the voice replied, its tone heavy with resignation. That night, the air grew thick, almost suffocating. Shadows slithered across the walls, coalescing into shapes that seemed to watch me. Max snarled, his fur bristling as he backed away from me, his growls guttural and filled with something deeply unnatural. His eyes gleamed with an eerie light, and his body tensed as though he was fighting something inside himself. The air grew colder, and I could feel an oppressive weight settle over the house, a silent promise of what was to come. I reached out to Max, my voice trembling. It's okay, buddy. It's me, I whispered. But he snapped at my hand, his teeth grazing my skin. The betrayal stung more than the near bite. This wasn't my Max anymore, or at least not entirely. The phone rang again, slicing through the suffocating silence. I snatched it up, my hands shaking. You've left the door open for it to leave, the voice said. Max is the tether. Sever the bond and it will leave or it will take you both. My mind raced, the ultimatum hanging over me like a guillotine. Tether. Sever the bond. Max had been my only constant, my companion through thick and thin. The thought of abandoning him to this horror was unthinkable. I won't do it, I said through gritted teeth, defiance flaring. I won't give up on him. Then you've chosen your fate, the voice replied, colder than before. The entity will come. You will have eternity to regret your decision. I hung up, my heart hammering. Max's growls deepened, his body trembling violently. His fur bristled as his eyes locked onto mine, filled with a mix of fear and something alien. I crouched down, tears streaming as I whispered reassurances, my voice breaking. "Stay with me, Max. Please. We'll get through this." His convulsions grew worse, his body contorting unnaturally, as if something inside him was fighting to break free. His eyes burned brighter, a sickly amber glow that lit the darkened room. The shadows on the walls began to move, no longer bound to the objects that cast them. They stretched and twisted, creeping closer like predators closing in on prey. I held Max tighter, even as his body grew cold to the touch, as if the warmth of life was being drained away. I whispered his name over and over, a desperate mantra against the encroaching darkness. Yet, deep down, I knew the truth. Something was coming, and it was almost here. It wasn't long before the entity came for me. It arrived just past midnight, its presence heralded by a suffocating darkness that seeped through every crack in the house. Shadows twisted and writhed, forming a grotesque figure that towered above me. Its face was a shifting nightmare, a blur of eyes and mouths that seemed to mock human features. "You've resisted long enough," it hissed, its voice a low rumble that reverberated through my skull. "It's time to fulfill your role, James." "Max is merely a bridge connecting me to you," it continued in a delightful tone. "What I really want is your soul, James. It belongs to me, forever." I backed away, my breath hitching as the entity advanced. "Why? What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice cracking. It laughed, a sound that sent icy needles down my spine. "What I want is already mine, you, but I am not a mere collector of souls, James. I am a greater demon of hell, a ruler of torment and despair. And you, dear mortal, have been chosen to serve, to suffer, and to add to my power." Its form solidified, revealing a monstrous body cloaked in fire and shadow. Horns spiraled from its head and its eyes burned with an unholy light. As it spoke, the ground beneath me cracked, glowing with molten heat. "You will join me in oblivion as merely another one of my loyal toys, slowly working your way up to becoming a servant in, let's say, 200 years' time," it continued, extending a clawed hand, his fist slowly extending into an open palm. "Your obedience has brought you to this moment. Take my mark, and you will share in a tiny fraction of my power, or refuse, and I will drag you into eternal suffering." Desperation clawed at me, but some part of me, buried deep beneath the fear, rebelled. "I won't serve you," I spat, trembling but resolute. The demon's smile widened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "You already do. Every call you made, every step you took was by my design. You've sown chaos, fractured lives, and opened the door for me. Refusal changes nothing." It lunged, its fiery claws wrapping around me as the world dissolved into darkness. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the void. When I awoke, I was no longer in Willow Creek. I stood in a realm of endless torment, a desolate landscape of twisted rock and rivers of fire and brimstone. Above, the sky churned with storms of ash and flame. The demon loomed over me, triumphant. "Welcome to your new home, James, like many other denizens of this realm who I've already taken from the mortal world. And no doubt, many other souls will continue to follow in your footsteps." The entity's voice filled the air, mocking and cruel. "You are mine now, James, but I will offer you a generous bargain that you would be a fool to refuse." It explained the terms. For 1 hour each night, I could return to the mortal realm, the realm of the living. But I was forbidden to speak of the entity or reveal its true nature to anyone. If I did, the torment I endured would be unimaginable. Desperate for any semblance of freedom, I agreed. Each night at midnight, I found myself back in the world I once knew, but I was no longer a man. My form was spectral, my presence fleeting. I could touch nothing, change nothing. All I could do was watch. Expending enough energy, I could communicate a few brief and simple messages, almost always to the surprise and dumbfounded terror of their mortal recipients. Driven by guilt and a need for redemption, I began making the calls through people's telephones. I found others like me, people marked by the entity's hunger. Do exactly as I say, I would tell them, my voice trembling with urgency. Some listened, following the rituals I instructed them to carry out and narrowly escaping the entity's grasp. Others dismissed my warnings, their skepticism sealing their fate. I watched over them, powerless to intervene in the choice they make. Each failure weighed heavily on me, the entity's mocking laughter echoing in my ears as I was dragged back to its domain. It showed me visions of those I couldn't save, their faces twisted in agony, their screams a constant reminder of my helplessness. Max, I learned, had been freed. He lived with a new family, his memories of me and the horrors we faced seemingly erased. I watched him from the shadows, his wagging tail a bittersweet sight. He was safe, but I was not. I began to notice patterns in the entity's behavior. It thrived on fear and chaos, its power growing with every failure, every soul it consumed. The calls I made were not just warnings. They were attempts to disrupt its cycle, to weaken its grip on the mortal world, but the cost was high. Each time I failed, the entity grew stronger, its realm more oppressive. As the clock struck 1 a.m., I was pulled back into the entity's realm, where it awaited me with cruel delight. Yet I continued my mission, calling out to those in danger, hoping to save as many as I can, save them from the fate I could not escape. Somewhere a phone rings at midnight. A voice whispers, "Do exactly as I say, your life depends on it."